Could the Russian military conquer Finland on its own? On paper, it's the classic mismatch. A nuclear-armed giant with sprawling armies, shipyards and air bases facing a Nordic nation whose greatest superpower appears to be forests, lakes and the ability to remain absolutely unbothered at -25. But paper burns, forests fight back, and Finland, quietly, methodically, has spent decades building a military machine designed for one opponent in one environment for one job. Make an invasion so staggeringly costly that no sane planner signs the operation order. After April 4th, 2023, when Finland joined NATO and turned the Baltic Nordic chessboard on its head, that job got even easier. If Russia ever tried to take Finland alone, it would be playing an away game against a team that trains on the ice, sleeps in the woods, and brings its own bridges. To understand why, we need to revisit a familiar story in Helsinki. The one where Moscow underestimates Finns, the thermometer dives, and the terrain does the talking. The Winter War and Continuation War hardwired a national reflex: disperse, dig in, and make the invader pay for every kilometre. That reflex became doctrine during the Cold War and matured into Finland's total defence model. General conscription, a massive trained reserve, civil infrastructure wired for wartime, and the political will to mobilise all of it fast. In practice, total defence means your mechanic, your physics teacher, and the person who just fixed your coffee machine are reservists who already know which roadblocks they'll build on day one. It also means the invader's best map app is guess. The modern Finnish defence forces are compact in peacetime, roughly 24,000 active, but that's a snapshot, not the movie. The wartime army surges to about 280,000 trained troops, with a reserve historically counted in the hundreds of thousands. Helsinki has even moved to extend reservist age limit to add roughly 125,000 more by the early 2030s. That's not a typo, it's a mobilization philosophy. Most of Europe downsized and specialized after 1991. Finland stayed stubbornly unfashionable and kept an army built to fight at home. When you're a country with a 1,340-kilometre border with Russia, survival is unfashionable. The geography reads like a defensive manual: taiga that swallows vehicles, lake chains that fracture any axis of advance, rocky moraines that turn tracked columns into slow-motion crane operations, and an Arctic ceiling where roads are suggestions and daylight is negotiable. The country's road and rail grids are designed to be cut and rerouted. Bridges can be blown up by breakfast and replaced by supper. Fires can be masked from hidden gun lines on logging roads you didn't know existed yesterday. And when spring arrives, the Rasputitsa-style melt turns low ground into porridge. Bring wide tracks, long chains, and a sense of humour. Bring mosquito repellent too. Finland fields the only air force in Europe that hums at 500,000 wings per second. If Russia came, from where? Historically, through Karelia and along the Gulf of Finland, with the Karelian Isthmus offering the widest corridor toward Helsinki. North of Ladoga, the approaches narrow into choke points, where every kilometre favours the defender. Further up in Lapland, towards Sala and the Kola flank, the map becomes a catalogue of ambush sites. The Russian Northern Fleet's garrisons on the Kola Peninsula, home to ballistic missile submarines and the fleet's command at Severomorsk, loom over any campaign plan. But they also anchor Moscow to facilities it cannot afford to lose. In a war of choice against Finland, those bases would be liabilities to protect as much as hammers to swing. Now zoom into the order of battle. Finland's army fields modern armour, Leopard 2A6 main battle tanks, backed by reserve Leopard 2A4s, and a land force that prizes mobility, camouflage and artillery. The Finnish artillery park, famously large for a country its size, now includes dozens of K9 Mukuri 155mm self-propelled howitzers and tracked MLRS, dispersible across a web of hides and pre-surveyed firing points. In a Finnish playbook, the first response to a column sighting is not a frontal duel. It's a curtain of steel dropped from somewhere the enemy can't see, coordinated by units that practice doing this every summer, winter and in between. Any attacker who thinks we'll just blitz through the trees finds out those trees answer back, loudly. Air power? The Finns have lived under Russian and Soviet aircraft their whole modern life. They've spent that time building one of Europe's densest ground-based air defence architectures for a small state. At short to medium range sits NASAMS, networked, mobile, and battle-proven, already tied into the defence of the capital region. And in 2023, Finland went long range, greenlighting the David Sling system from Israel, the first export customer, plugging a high-altitude hole and complicating any plan that starts with gain air superiority on day one. That phrase died in Ukraine. In Finland, it may not be born at all. The fighter fleet is changing, by design, not by panic. Finland chose the F-35A in its HX competition, ordering 64 jets to replace the FA-18 CDS. Training pipelines are open, the first airframes are rolling out, and deliveries begin in the latter half of 2026, with early training staged abroad before jets bed down at home. Russia's Su-35s and Su-34s are credible threats on paper, but stealth, sensors, and networks erase numbers frighteningly fast. An F-35 linked to NASAMS and David Sling isn't a single aircraft, it's a flying node for a kill web. And unlike Russia's newest designs, Finland's jets will actually arrive. If the air picture is complicated, the maritime one is downright ugly for Moscow. With Finland in NATO and Sweden following in March 2024, the Baltic Sea became, to use the phrase everyone uses, a NATO lake. That means Russian naval logistics to Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg are under constant surveillance, vulnerable to interdiction, and, in wartime, would be contested by submarines, air power, and shore-based anti-ship batteries. Finland's navy is small, but coastal missile regiments and fast attack craft operating in archipelagic terrain give any surface group a bad day. Meanwhile, NATO air and sea forces from Norway and Denmark clamped the Skagerrak, and Poland and the Baltics sealed the other shore. The Baltic is not a permissive theatre for Russia, it's a bowl. The cost calculus gets worse for Moscow the closer you look at logistics. Even an attack focused on southeastern Finland must push supplies through cramped corridors north of St. Petersburg or down from the Kola railheads, both within reach of Finnish fires and, in an Article 5 world, NATO's long arm. Fuel convoys slip on the same ice, pontoon bridges blow up just as bright, and every staging area looks like a target on satellite. Russia can boast depth. On paper, mobilization can refill losses. But in Ukraine, we watched those reserves arrive light on maintenance, training, and esprit. Finland's reserves are the opposite. Small unit leaders who know their sector better than your maps and can vanish between two spruce trees with a javelin and an attitude. There's also the border. It's long, it's lonely, and today it's more controlled. In 2023 to 2025, after waves of what Helsinki calls hybrid pressure via orchestrated migrant flows, Finland shuttered crossings and began erecting a barrier along the most vulnerable stretches, a 200-kilometre fence in selected sectors, with surveillance baked in. This doesn't stop armies, it does slow and channel grey zone moves, and keeps the battlefield shaped before the first shot. For a country that wins by time and terrain, a day mattered yesterday and will matter tomorrow. And then there's the economy and politics, the artillery behind the artillery. Unlike many small states, Finland already spends above NATO's 2% guideline and intends to keep climbing, with government plans projecting defense outlays around 2.4% of GDP in 2024 and higher in the years ahead. That money doesn't just buy jets, it buys munition stockpiles, dispersal fields, hardened shelters, and the most precious commodity in northern war, redundancy. Miss one road, there's another. Lose a depot, there's a second. Finnish defense budgeting looks boring right up until you need it to be there. Russia, for its part, isn't standing still. The Northern Fleet is refitting, new units have appeared in Karelia and beyond, and the Kremlin broadcasts readiness around the Arctic. But ships tied to piers don't seize cities, and submarines won't hold Tampere. A land campaign would demand formations already stretched in Ukraine, and a logistics base that struggled on friendly roads. The closer those units get to Finland's lakes and trees, the more the tables tilt. If you can't sustain, you can't stay. And if you can't stay, you can't conquer. Add NATO. Any Russian attempt to take Finnish ground doesn't open one front, it lights a ring. Norway's long-range fires and P-8s hunt north, Sweden's grip on Gotland narrows the Baltic, and Allied air forces crowd the skies from Rovaniemi to Ramstein. Pre-planned reinforcement routes across Sweden turn what used to be an isolated northern theatre into a throughway for heavy brigades and air defence battalions. In that world, Russia isn't just fighting Finland. It's trying to impose escalation control on an alliance designed to escalate where it chooses. That's a poker table where Moscow holds a short stack. Could Russia choose a different script? Hybrid pressure, cyber strikes, sabotage, snap exercises on the border? It already has, and Finland already answered. Close crossings, harden nodes, arrest the saboteurs, keep the lights on. The societal piece matters here. Finland's concept of sisu, that stubborn, quiet, collective grit, is not a bumper sticker. It's the reason roads get plowed at 4 in the morning and bridges get rebuilt at 4 in the afternoon. It's also why a conscript army can turn into a wartime force in days. If you're looking for a hearts and minds pressure point, this is the wrong population. They drink coffee by the vat and then go skiing with a machine gun. One of those is a joke. Barely. Let's map the first 30 days of a notional invasion. Russian artillery and aviation hammer border brigades and air bases. Finnish air defenses light up. NASAMS batteries shuffle between hides. David Sling watches for higher flyers and long-range weapons. Airfields disperse jets onto road bases. Finland practices this every year, while the army's battle groups fall back to pre-surveyed lines, trading space for attrition. Attacking units move in narrow files. Engineer assets working overtime to keep momentum. Every blown culvert is another hour. Every forest lane hides a scout team calling fire. By week 2, the attacker's daily consumption becomes the story. Fuel bladders, tires, spares, replacements. By week 3, it's not about map arrows, it's about trucks and whether the bridges ahead still exist. Somewhere in that calendar, Allied aircraft begin to arrive in quantity if Article 5 is invoked. Not the kind of surprise a corps commander wants. If Moscow tried to shortcut the campaign through shock, airborne drops or helicopter air assault deep toward the capital, the same problem emerges. The drop zones lie under rings of sensors and shooters. Finland's dispersed anti-armor teams and mortars hunt rotorcraft. Counter-mobility obstacles appear where roads narrow, and every success behind the lines lives on borrowed time, because the countryside doesn't cooperate once the locals wake up. Picture a platoon in the woods with low batteries when the night goes to -15. That's not a tactical vignette. That's a rescue mission.
Even Russia's best argument, mass, blunts here. Yes, the Russian army on paper dwarfs Finland's, but in every modern conflict, quality, training, C2, logistics and morale turn mass into something useful. Finland gets high marks on all 5, especially coordination between civilians and the military. Meanwhile, Ukraine has exposed just how quickly Russian mass turns brittle under sustained fire when logistics lag and junior leadership is weak. In Finland's forests, those weaknesses aren't inconveniences, they're exit signs. We should also talk about the thing every strategist fears: escalation beyond conventional. The presence of the Northern Fleet's strategic assets means crises in Finland would never be isolated from nuclear signalling. But that's precisely why the idea of conquering Finland runs aground. The higher the stakes for Russia's strategic deterrent, the more suicidal it becomes to tie up ground forces in a conventional slugfest that invites NATO intervention and risks miscalculation around Kola. There is no stable ladder here, just rungs that break in your hand. What about the home front? Finland's society is prepped like an alpine pack. Light, but complete. Fuel, food and medicine stocks, shelters, redundant comms, and a culture of volunteering translate to endurance. When the power cuts, generators growl. When lines fail, runners appear. When rumours circulate, the government speaks plainly. The goal isn't to be flashy, it's to avoid being surprised. In the worst days, boring wins wars. Now add the intangible, the psychology of the defender. An invader needs a quick victory, because the defender adapts every day. Finnish units don't have to hold every meter. They have to keep the invader burning time and fuel, while the weather, morale, and allies do the rest. That's not romantic, it's arithmetic. And the arithmetic is brutal. The trucks never keep up, the bridges never last, and the air never quite belongs to you. The forests never stop watching. So, could the Russian military conquer Finland on its own? Here's the honest, sober answer. Moscow could hurt Finland. Any large neighbour can hurt a smaller one, but hurt is not hold. To take and keep Finnish territory against a mobilised reserve in that terrain, under those skies, with those logistics, while NATO lurks one phone call away, would demand a scale of competence, stockpiles, and sustained operational tempo that Russia has not demonstrated in Ukraine, let alone in a harder theatre. Every day of fighting would add another zero to the bill. Every kilometre forward would demand 3 behind, and every success would be a new problem to supply. Finland doesn't pose with power, it prepares it. It doesn't tear down forests, it disappears into them. Its strategy is the opposite of flashy. A million quiet tasks done right for a very long time, so that, on the worst day, an invader discovers that the map was lying. The roads lead somewhere, yes, straight into ambushes, artillery grids, and a population that long ago made up its mind. In a sane world, that alone deters. In the world we have, it makes conquest a fantasy.
The Baltic is a bowl, the Arctic a tripwire, and the taiga a maze. Russia can rattle sabres and shift brigades, but victory in Finland would demand a miracle of logistics and a collapse of Finnish will. The first doesn't exist on the roads to Kuovola, the second doesn't exist at all. One last question, then, the one that matters. If war came north, would Finland stand alone? The new flag at NATO says no. The forests say they never did. And somewhere, a platoon sergeant in Lapland pours another cup of coffee, checks a map, and smiles. Because winter is a season. Defense here is a habit. And habits are very hard to conquer.